Take one look at Orville Rogers. At 99, he's still going strong, and you might ask yourself, what's the secret? Well, Orville found it in the pages of a book nearly 50 years ago. And with almost half a century of maintaining a steady level of physical activity, he's convinced that people don't stop running because they get old.
There are almost no people left on this planet who are still alive at 100 years old, let alone people who are still competing. And out of that tiny handful, there is basically nobody who is still breaking actual world records at that age. But that is exactly what happened with a man named Orville Rogers, a pilot from Dallas, Texas, who didn't even start running until he was 50 years old, and who somehow turned that decision into one of the most remarkable stories in the entire history of Masters track and field. By the time his life was over, this man had set 13 world records, and the most unbelievable part of all of it happened right at the very top, at 100 years old, when most people have long since stopped moving at all. Before any of the running happened, you need to understand the life this man actually lived, because it's honestly just as wild as anything he did on a track. He was born on November 28, 1917, in Hubbard, Texas, and grew up bouncing between Oklahoma City, Edmond, and eventually Sulphur, Oklahoma, after his parents split and his mother moved the family back in with her own parents. Around age 10, a plane flew low over his town and actually landed nearby, and young Orville rode his bike out to see it, talked to the pilot, found out he was charging $4 for rides, ran home, broke open his own piggy bank, and came back with the money for his very first flight. That one moment locked in his entire future. He knew right there he wanted to be a pilot. And around that same stretch of his childhood, he also made the decision that shaped the rest of his life in a completely different direction, walking into a small Southern Baptist church in Sulphur and choosing to commit his life to his faith, a decision he said he never once regretted for the rest of his 100+ years on Earth. He went on to graduate from the University of Oklahoma in 1940 with a degree in mechanical engineering, and that's also where he met his future wife, Esther Beth Shannon. World War II broke out right around the same time, and he joined the Army Air Corps, spending the entire war in the training command, teaching other young pilots how to fly rather than flying combat missions himself. After the war, he stayed in service through Korea with the Air Force, and in 1951, he was assigned to fly the B-36, which at the time was the single largest airplane on the planet. He was on 24-hour nuclear alert, and his actual assigned target if war had broken out was the north side of Moscow. He said plainly that he was relieved that bomb was never dropped, and what makes that part of his story even more incredible is what happened decades later. Because in 2004, his wife and he went on a missionary trip to Russia and ended up working within about 5 miles of that exact same target, except this time they were running medical clinics and sharing their faith instead of carrying a weapon. That's the kind of full circle moment you couldn't write better if you tried. After his military service, he was hired by Braniff Airways in 1945 and flew commercially for them for 32 straight years before retiring in 1977. He flew the DC-8 across international routes between the US and South America, and his personal favorite plane to fly was the Boeing 727. On top of his regular airline job, he also volunteered to ferry 46 missionary airplanes for Wycliffe Bible translators, 20 of them inside the United States and 26 of them across the ocean, including solo flights over the Atlantic and Pacific in single-engine planes, which on its own takes a level of nerve most people will never have to test in their lives. In 2017, he was inducted into the Braniff Airways Hall of Fame. And here's a detail about him that says more about his character than almost anything else. His entire lifetime of earnings from flying between the airline and the military only added up to around $1.6 million, yet he and his wife ended up giving away more than $35 million to ministries and causes over the course of their life together, all built off smart investments in real estate and oil and gas. That's not luck, that's discipline applied to everything he touched, not just running. And running is where everything changes for him, because at age 50, with no athletic background to speak of, he reads a book called Aerobics by Dr. Kenneth Cooper, and he starts running the very next day. He credits that one decision and that one doctor with saving his life, not figuratively, but literally, at least once, and probably twice, the second time being when a Cooper fitness test actually caught a blockage in his heart before it became fatal. He became a local marathon runner and kept running marathons all the way until he was 72 years old. And years later, in his 90s and beyond, he said plainly that he had no joint problems at all, nothing holding him back. And honestly, I think that's the whole lesson sitting right in the middle of this story. People don't stop running because they get old. They get old because they stop running. And this man is proof of that in the most literal sense possible, because he simply never stopped. The world records start stacking up well before he hits 100. record. He sets Masters records at age 90 and again at 95. In March of 2008, just 3 weeks after losing his wife, he still goes out and competes in Boston, running the 800 meters and setting a brand new world record in his age group, with his mile time landing close behind his own personal best from years earlier. In 2015, he teams up with other runners in their 90s to set multiple relay world records as a group. And then in 2017, at 99 years old, he lines up in a sprint against a 92-year-old named Dixon Hemphill and wins the race by 0.05 seconds. A finish so close and so unbelievable for two men in their 90s that the video goes properly viral and lands him on national news. By the time it's all said and done, he finishes his life with 13 total world records to his name, all within Masters track and field. But the part of this story that actually earns the title sits right at the top of his life, because for his 100th birthday, instead of throwing a normal party, Orville and his entire family go out and run a combined 100 miles together around White Rock Lake in Dallas. And then, at the 2018 USATF Masters Indoor Championships, now officially in the 100-year-old age bracket, he sets 2 more world records, running 19.13 seconds in the 60 meters and 4 minutes 16.90 in the 400 meters. Think about that for a second. A man who didn't put on running shoes until he was 50 is, at the literal start of his second century of life, still the fastest human being his exact age has ever produced on record. In 2020, he was voted into the USATF Masters Hall of Fame, sealing what is genuinely one of the most complete athletic stories I have ever come across, built almost entirely in the second half of an already full life. What gets me the most about this man isn't even the records, it's the way he talked about his own life right up until the end. He said he never once asked God for fame, riches, or a long life, and that he was given all three anyway, and that his only real prayer in his final years was simply to finish well without losing his standards along the way. Most people spend the last decade of their life slowing down, depending on other people for basic things, watching their body fall apart a little more each year. This man spent that same decade out sprinting people 40 years younger than him and breaking world records most 20-year-olds will never come close to. And when you actually look at the mechanics of it, his bones, his joints, his stride at 99 years old, none of it lines up with what we normally expect from someone that age, and that alone makes a pretty strong case for what consistent movement actually does to a human body across a lifetime, even one that didn't start moving seriously until halfway through it. He passed away on November 14th, 2019, just 2 weeks shy of what would have been his 102nd birthday after a heart condition was found and treated earlier that same year. But by every account, he stayed active and engaged almost right up to the very end, which is exactly how he said he wanted to finish. A man who started running at 50 ended up becoming one of the greatest age group runners who has ever lived, and the only thing that changed between never running a single day in his life and breaking 13 world records was the decision to actually start. So I want to know from you honestly, would you have the discipline to pick up something completely new at 50 years old and still be breaking records 50 years after that? Drop your honest answer below. I read every single one of them. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time.